Stephen Price, you scored Over the Moon, which is Glenn Keane's feature directorial debut. So how did you come aboard this film?
It was a strange one. I'd worked on a previous animated film with the editor, Edie Ichioka, and she was heading onto this mystery film. And all I knew was that it was by Glenn Keane. So I was always just hassling her basically and phoning up saying, what's he like? What's the process like? What is it? Is it great? And she was always, really, really positive. But there was never any sense that there would be any sort of opening there until one day there was an invite to kind of have a chat, which we did. And they sent me the script and they sent me some of the visuals, which were a lot of his hand-drawn visuals. And just the combination of that. And then when we did talk about music and about his art and all the rest of it, it was just, you desperately wanted to be involved, basically, because to be around that sort of creative person is a bit of a thrill.
Mm-hmm. What is it like working with an animator turned director?
It was fascinating for me because it was a very different way of communicating. I don't think at any point Glenn particularly asked for any sort of music particularly. He never kind of tried to guide me in any sort of stylistic things, thematic things. But what we would have is these conversations about character. And if I was looking to write a theme for one of the characters or something like that, he would kind of say that I can't tell you musically what I want, but I can tell you how I learned to draw the character. And so he would start to go into great detail about every element of the way a face would move, the way an eyebrow would curve, the way a character's hair was designed, and the process he'd gone through to create that. And it kind of strangely gave you the entire backstory of a character and the entire motivations and that, which musically just seemed to be a great way of getting into things. You kind of suddenly got a real sense of this character. And when he described Fei-Fei's hair as spiky, and it's a reflection of her energy because she's so full of ideas and drive, that kind of drove you straight to the keyboard and finding a way to write a tune that lived up to what he'd drawn.
Mm-hmm. How much research did you do into Chinese mythology and culture?
I did a fair amount around it, but it was kind of one of those things where the film kind of told you the version of the mythology that it wanted to tell you. So I found very soon to really trust in the storytelling. And there was a bit of research I did around Chinese instrumentation, because we talked very early on in the process about wanting to incorporate Chinese instruments and make the film feel like it really was Chinese through every element of it, but without doing that in a cliched kind of way, which traditionally in a film has been the Westerns sort of film orchestra. Yeah. With a couple of songs.
I'm Chinese, and I like that. Like, it wasn't like a westernized Hollywood version.
I'm very relieved that you say that, because that was my concern really. And so I recorded some soloists early. I recorded a gutsun, I recorded an erhu, and a few woodwind instruments. Not really with anything written particularly. It was almost just sort of notes and single lines and textures. And then I would take those into my little studio and start playing with them and stretching them and manipulating them. And kind of, I'd start a scene almost by building these textures around and just giving myself a bed, almost like putting a sort of a background on a painting before you start sort of heading in and putting your actual details, your figures in there. And that was a real help to me, really. It felt like it guided me in a way without having to feel like I was trying to write a cliche that I'm so ill prepared for. It was a kind of, hopefully it felt like China was present in every note without me sort of doing a cliched version.
What was that process like of like weaving in those like Chinese instruments like into like your like orchestrations for the rest of the score?
Well, the way I tend to work is that from day one of writing, really, I'm building up the final cue. So, these recordings, a lot of those original recordings that were done way before really I got into the thick of writing, their processes and the noises that I made from those are still present in the film. So they would become part of the textures of, one of the bits of the film, we go into Lunaria, which is this, the dark side of the moon. And it's everything in that place is glimmering and shining. And a lot of those glimmers and shines are made out of these processed Chinese instruments. And it kind of felt right that they were in there and everything felt like it had been born out of those instruments, the same way as that place had been born out of the moon goddess's tears in the myth. So they became really intrinsic. And then there were solo instruments that we did put on later, but I tried to really associate them very closely with character and try and use them in appropriate ways.
Mm-hmm. There's like two sets. I mean, there's the two main like sets in the movie, like with her on like on Earth, and like the music there is more grounded, no pun intended. But then when she goes to Lunaria on the moon, it's really fantastical and magical. So how did you approach those sounds for those two places?
It felt like the animation really led me into it. When we were in China at the beginning and at the end of the film, you know, they're in this little water village, and everything's very small and family orientated. Everything seems to be based around food, which looks amazing. And it was this real sort of family busyness to everything. You know, Fei Fei, our lead character herself, she's full of energy. Chin, there's what will be her stepbrother, very, very sort of energetic. The family's all interrupting each other. And it kind of led you to write very energetic music, you know, and every line would kind of be interrupted by the next line, and the violins might be interrupted by the flutes, and it would all kind of interweave. But then when you got up into the air and, you know, you got to the moon, suddenly the whole film kind of opens up, and you've got these big, wide, colorful vistas. And the music felt like it could do that then, and the lines become much more extended, and the colors certainly change. But just writing wise, it felt like I could kind of leave space there and kind of really build a different sort of writing. You know, it's less sort of taut and suddenly more expansive. And hopefully towards the end, we kind of managed to combine those two things.
Mm-hmm. The piece for her takeoff in the rocket ship to go to Lunaria, it's really great because it kind of builds and builds, and then it just kind of explodes like once she gets there. So, you know, when it's a big sequence like that, like a turning point in the movie, like does that present more pressure to you to score?
That one in particular was the bit I was most terrified about, but largely because that was the first thing I ever saw. That was the image from that were the things that I first saw when I was being spoken to about the project. And you kind of knew that bit had to work, you know, that you had to feel the same sense of wonder that is in her eyes as she goes there. And I remember a conversation with Glenn Keane very early on about that. I'd seen some of the visuals of Lunaria, and it just looks, you know, crazy. It's like everything is neon and pulsating, and it totally not what I expected when I first read the script. It was this incredible kind of world. And I said to him at one point, this looks kind of unique, doesn't it? So the music's going to have to be unique. And he just sort of nodded at me like, of course it is, you know. And that was kind of the spirit of the film, really. He kind of challenged everyone to do something that they'd not done before and find something that felt very unique to the images he'd done. But yeah, I was head stiff for that sequence, basically.
Oh, this is also a musical. There's a couple of songs in there. So what is it like writing music to complement the songs? I mean, you sort of did that with Baby Driver.
Yeah, and something I quite enjoy actually is taking on the whole soundtrack and making, you know, incorporating a song, you know, in something like Baby Driver, you know, so many songs. And in this, there were I think 8 pre-written songs before I got involved, and they'd all been placed in their positions in the film. But they're really sort of disparate sounding songs. You know, there's some that are kind of Broadway influenced. There's others that are, I mean, there's a sort of Katy Perry stroke Beyonce kind of tribute thing.
Oh, I love Lunaria. There's like pop, and then there's like rap.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's all kind of things. And so I was really aware that, you know, the score needed to really hold the hand through that and make that all feel part of this story. And that became a fun challenge. And, you know, we recorded the songs, the orchestrations for the songs as part of the main sessions, and tried to sort of bring a unity to it that way. And then, you know, I was weaving, you know, fragments of song ideas where appropriate into the score, little motifs here and there to give callbacks in different places where it felt like it helped the story. And hopefully it felt like, you know, this whole thing was this seamless journey that continually opens up as Fei Fei's experience kind of opens up.
Mm-hmm. I also love the sequence when Fei Fei's in the chamber of exquisite sadness. And it's just, you know, it's a great contrast to like everything else about Lunaria when it's like big and bright and bold and loud, and, you know, everything, the lights are literally out at that point. So what was it like approaching that scene?
That was probably the scene that took the most work, in that you were trying to write something that was completely empty feeling but was full of emotion as well. And it was a matter of how few notes you could find to really express every emotion. There's quite a lot happens within that silence, you know. And I found, you know, a combination of melodic ideas, but also textural things. That the whole ambience of that chamber is elements of the voice of the moon goddess. It's all stretched out notes that are kind of echoing around you, because this place is totally the world of her sadness. And it was kind of a lot of mixing, that one. You know, there was a lot of elements far more than you'd imagine from listening to it, but just little whispers here and there of things, and calibrating that so it felt like you'd got that sense of increasing doom as it went through, and the sadness and almost a weight of sadness.
Yeah,
was kind of, yeah, it was a lot of different iterations, and obviously it was one of those areas where, you know, everyone's idea of sadness is kind of slightly different, and so you're talking to the filmmakers and having very interesting conversations about, you know, how things are making you feel, and we seem to land in a place that felt kind of heavy, but hopefully not oppressive.
It was both like heavy and light. it's
yeah,
like a mix. But
kind of the hope, this sort of, you know, everything was kind of within reach, but not quite there. You know, there was almost a way out, but never within reach, and that was, yeah, it was a lovely challenge to work on that sequence. I thought it looked beautiful as well, which is always, you know, very rewarding to work on something that's so beautiful looking like that.
And you guys had to record everything in quarantine, right? This all happened.
Yeah. I got it all wrong. The film I recorded just before COVID hit was an entirely electronic score that I did just on my own, and then the first score I recorded post-pandemic was an animation score based on, you know, originally the idea was to have a big orchestra all playing in a room together in London, which is where we were going to do it. And we couldn't do that. We got very close to recording in London, but we were just too soon for it to be safe. So we ended up doing a remote recording in Vienna for the orchestral component of it. And I was sitting in my studio. Vienna was separate. We could do a string section and a brass section and a woodwind section, percussion all separately. And then the filmmakers were all New York and LA. And it was sort of terrifying because I've always been very, very involved in my recordings. I'm always in the room. I kind of like the approach of just going up and talking to an individual musician, and you know, if they've got a solo coming up, we'll talk about it separately. You know, we won't deal with 50 people listening into the conversation. We'll just, because, you know, I'm trying to talk about quite intimate, sort of sensitive things musically for me, and we couldn't do that. But it was kind of, it was a strange one in that within the first session, I think everyone was so pleased to be making music again, because no one had really been able to do anything. And we were in Vienna, they'd been shut down for a while as well. And, you know, the first cue that we put up was one of the sort of big melodic moments in the film. And it really had a sense that everyone was just so relieved to be making music together again, that there was a real spirit to the sessions. And, you know, obviously I can't wait to the time when we can do these things, you know, in the same room again, but it certainly felt nice to just be making music on any kind of level.
Yeah, it's like a camaraderie, like we're all in it
together.
Together.
Exactly that. So it was, you know, some lovely moments.
Well, Stephen, it was great speaking with you. Thank you so much for your time.